Hello and welcome to Spirit Pig. Inspired by the mission 7 billion fulfilled people, I track down the greatest thought leaders on the planet and interview them about happiness and fulfillment. Today I'm speaking with Sonja Lyubomirsky Ph.D. Sonja is Professor of Psychology at the University of California, Riverside. She's been conducting research on happiness for 28 years and has been awarded numerous grants, including $1 million from the National Institute of Mental Health to conduct research on the possibility of permanently increasing happiness. She's the best-selling author of the books The How of Happiness and The Myths of Happiness. Her research has been written up in hundreds of magazines and newspapers, and she's appeared in multiple TV shows and feature documentaries. Her work is focused primarily on 3 critical questions. What makes people happy? Is happiness a good thing? And how can we make people happier still? Sonja, thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure to talk to you.
One thing I found really interesting, I knew that you'd been doing it for, like 28 years, almost 30 years, but when you started studying happiness back in 1989, I think at the time there was only one other person in the whole world studying the subject, Hedonic, right? You were
That's
number
right,
2.
Hedonic, and he didn't even call it happiness, right? He called it subjective well-being. He mentioned to me once that he thought he couldn't get tenure, he couldn't get promoted as a professor where he was at the time, University of Illinois, if he was studying such a fuzzy, kind of unscientific sounding topic as happiness. So he came up with this sort of term subjective well-being because it sounded more scientific.
And it's just great because now, it's like you said, like a fluffy subject, unscientific. But now, it's widespread. Every business, every company is talking about like well-being, talking about happiness, mindfulness, all these kind of things. It's exploded, hasn't it?
It really has exploded, not just in psychology, but as you say, like in organizations, neuroscience, other social sciences. It's become an acceptable topic now that we sort of feel like we know how to measure happiness. We have some ideas about how to increase happiness. Now we can sort of offer lay people, including in schools and organizations, advice about what they can do to boost their happiness. Because once you're happier, lots of good things come to you. Happier people are more creative, they're more productive at work, they're physically healthier, they have better social relationships. So being happy isn't just about sort of feeling good. It has a lot of benefits as well.
And the idea of I think there's many different definitions of happiness, but you actually go with Ed's one, don't you? Where it's that combination of 2 components. On the one hand, positive emotions, joy, all these kind of things, positive emotions. And the second component is a sense of your life has meaning, it's a good life, you've got goals, you're striving for stuff. So it's that sort of combination of the 2. That's what we're talking about.
That's exactly right. I subscribe to that Dina's definition of happiness, right? As you say, the 2 components, the experience of positive emotions on a regular basis, not all the time, of course. Happy people experience negative emotions too. But positive emotions like joy, contentment, tranquility, pride, affection. But just experiencing positive emotions isn't enough. It's important to also have a sense that your life is good, that you're progressing towards your goals, that you're satisfied with your life. So yeah, exactly. Those kind of 2 components make up the definition of happiness.
People adapt to almost everything. Why is that so important to know in light of what we're talking about?
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting phenomenon called hedonic adaptation. And it is, as you say, it's sort of this remarkable ability that human beings have to get accustomed to get used to almost anything that happens to them. And it's actually a really good thing when it comes to adverse or negative events, right? When we, like there was a big hurricane in the United States and people are already kind of adapting to sort of the losses that they've experienced and kind of moving forward, and it's sort of good to have that ability, that resilience to adapt to negative things. But when it comes to the positive side of life, it's not so great, right? You don't want to adapt to marriage, right? You want to be sort of as happy today as you were on your wedding day. You don't want to adapt to the new car that you bought or even to your new shoes or whatever. So, but people really do adapt, and it's an important thing. The reason, there are theories about why we adapt. We can't kind of constantly be sort of excited about the new car or even the new relationship. But it sort of presents a challenge to researchers on happiness, because one of the questions sort of is, how do we maintain happiness and how do we become happier? And if we get used to almost any positive changes in our lives, then how can we ever become sort of happier? But there are there is research sort of to suggest sort of how we can try to maintain, kind of that joy and happiness even after, a positive event has already passed and we're getting used to it.
I mean, talking about the sustaining happiness, I quite like the Chinese proverb that you talked about. If you want to be happy for an hour, take a nap. Mm-hmm. If you want to be, what was the rest of that?
Right. I think it was if you want to be happy for an hour, take a nap. If you want to be happy for a day,
go fishing. Is it?
Go fishing. If you want to be happy for a year, win the lottery or something like that. And if you want to be happy for a lifetime, help somebody else. And this is sort of showing that helping others. And actually, we do quite a bit of research showing that helping others, doing acts of kindness, is actually a really, not only does it benefit others, but it benefits you because it makes you feel happier as well. Excuse me. And we don't adapt to positive changes in our relationships quite as quickly, right? So when you help others, you feel better about yourself as a person. Your social relationships are improved, become stronger. You might make new friends, and those are things that you don't adapt to as quickly.
Striving makes people much happier than actually achieving, don't they? It ties in the whole thing, it's the journey, not the destination stuff, but that actual act of striving, going for something, that's much more important.
Yeah, of course, achieving also makes people happy, but it doesn't make you happy sort of forever, right? And when you think about it from an evolutionary viewpoint, that it's good that human beings have this ability that, like, once we achieve a goal, we're like, okay, I've done it, and they want to move on to something else, right? If we didn't adapt, we would never kind of continue pursuing new goals, right? We kind of would stagnate. But the downside is that we're not content with just achievement. We want to continue striving, but that does present a really, I guess, simple recommendation for maintaining happiness, which is that to continue pursuing goals, striving, always having something around the corner to look forward to is important.
It's interesting because I totally agree. It's good to have those goals, but then where's that balance between sort of the goals versus the sort of the dissatisfaction? The grass is always greener, rather than, it's an interesting sort of balance, I guess.
It really is. There's a tension, right? There's a tension there because if you're never sort of satisfied with achieving your goals, right, then you're not really going to be happy. But I guess you want to. I think the average sort of healthy person is really happy and satisfied. Like they get the promotion, they start a new relationship, they learn a new skill, they achieve a new goal in their running speed or whatever they're doing health wise, and you really do feel happy. But you don't sort of stay there for a long time. Then you're like, okay, let's pursue a new goal. So you could do it in a positive way, right? You could sort of be flexible about your goals in a positive way as opposed to a negative way. The negative way would be like, I should have done better, or my neighbor is even better off than I am. The positive way is like, great, I achieved my personal standard, and now I'm going to try to beat it.
So you can have that both, because another theme that comes up again and again and again and again, like in so many interviews, is this idea of presence, being in the moment, living in the now. But you can have both, I guess. Like you can live in the now, you can be present, and also pursue future goals, future minded. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
Exactly. In fact, research suggests that most people are a combination of present and future oriented, a little bit past oriented, mostly present and future. And so really, I guess the key is to make sure the balance is a good one, right? So you don't want to be completely present, right? There's a lot of talk these days about sort of mindfulness and being present, and that's great. You definitely want that, but you don't want to be too present because then you're not going to be able to pursue those goals, right? You're going to neglect some really, really important sort of things in your life. But if you're too future oriented, then you're not going to really be able to stop and smell the roses and savor the positive things as they're kind of passing by you. So you want to have kind of, as I mentioned, the right balance between present and future, maybe a little bit of the past, because you don't want to forget the past. Sometimes it's important to sort of reminisce and learn lessons from the past.
Over the years, I think you've been called up many times by sort of like journalists and people asking for, they're about to write an article and they're like, what are the sort of the 5 steps to happiness? What are the 3 quick and easy things to be happier? Because I guess we're a culture who we want those, we want the magic pill, we want the quick fix. But your research has showed that happiness, it takes work, doesn't it? It's not a quick fix. As much as we'd love it to be, it's something that actually, like a lot of good things, it does take work day after day.
Exactly. I hate that question. Like, what are the three secrets to happiness? And sort of that's it. And I think in the West, I think Westerners especially are kind of used to, they want that magic solution. But yeah, just as you say, like when you think about any important goal in life, succeeding in your career, being healthy and fit, raising happy, successful children, all of those are lifetime goals, lifetime pursuits. And it's not like it's not like you go on a diet for 2 weeks and then you're done, forever. No, you really diet your entire life. You have to have a good diet your entire life. And so the same thing with happiness, same thing with maintaining good relationships, right? It takes work, but that work does not have to be unpleasant. It doesn't have to be a huge chore. It could be actually very fulfilling, meaningful, and even fun. And the work is hardest at the beginning, kind of like with anything when you're changing your habits. At the beginning, it's hard, right? You really have to effortfully and deliberately and consciously remind yourself to sort of think about, say, things in a more positive way. But then after a while, those kinds of thoughts become more habitual, and so the work is less. And once you develop those habits, then it becomes easier to maintain happiness.
I think whatever you call it, be it love, relationships, belonging, social support, but connection and connecting with people is probably it's right up there, isn't it? It's probably one of the most important ingredients for happiness. There's different things. It's often like subjective. Different things make different people happy, but one common thing that you see almost across the board with like when you research the happiest people is they all seem to have those strong connections in their life. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a famous article about sort of the happiest people that showed that the happiest people had good relationships, or at least some. They didn't have to have a lot of, they could be like one or two really meaningful ones. It could be some, a number of friends, but they have fulfilling relationships. And actually connectedness is one of my favorite concepts, because as you say, it could be a lot of different things. They could be connecting with a pet, but it has to be some kind of like strong connection to others. And that's partly why I say doing acts of kindness is so effective in boosting people's happiness, because it involves connecting to others. And when you think about almost any strategy that people use successfully to pursue and sort of become happier has to do with other people. Even when we sort of savor the good things in our lives, we often savor them with other people, or we tell other people about that. Human beings are social animals, right? So it is really critical for us to connect with others.
What you were saying there made me think about, because I saw one of the other things which was common in a lot of them, and even though this wasn't like paramount, it's not like necessary, but many people who were extremely happy often had some sort of religious or spiritual belief. And I guess that ties in. It's maybe not so much about the religion or the spirit, but it's, I guess, maybe connected to that idea of connecting to something, be it like connecting to your spirit, connecting to nature, connecting to the universe, whatever you call it. Mm-hmm. It ties into that idea of connection, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, the research on religion is really interesting, because religious people and spiritual people are happier than people who are less religious or spiritual. And there are two kind of primary explanations for that. One is actually something you haven't mentioned, which is that people who are religious often have a community, that is very strong, and they have strong families, strong communities around their mosque, their temple, their church. And so that could actually explain a lot of the relationship between religion and happiness. And the other one is sort of what you mentioned, the sort of connection to God or some spirit or something bigger than yourself, as you say. And sort of that gives people a sense of meaning that sort of not having that connection does not give. And so, yeah, I guess you could interpret almost everything in terms of connection.
Yeah, and I was going to say, this is maybe quite a crude one, but even people every Saturday they go and support their local football team, and it's about that community that they all they're all cheering for the same team. They all want someone to win, and it's that sense of brotherhood or sisterhood, I guess. So
absolutely, no, it's not a crude example at all. I mean, because as you say, how many people are sports fans that are like completely like alone in their basement, like not connected to anyone else. I mean, for most people it is a community. I mean, even if you're alone, you're connecting to that community on TV. And so yes, so much is about connection. People who are partying, even when you're doing things that are not so good for you, you're still connecting a lot of time with others. When you're in dysfunctional relationships, people have such a strong need to belong and to be loved and to connect that they will even stay in bad relationships.
We were talking at the very beginning about how suddenly there's been this huge excitement in this area, and so much new studies and in neuroscience and the brain, in so many different, I guess, fields that we wouldn't necessarily have known about at first. But all these different people from different camps are exploring this. What has been, in your opinion, probably some of the most exciting things over the last, I don't know, like 5-10 years?
In terms of sort of research on happiness or thinking
absolutely.
about happiness. Well, I guess one of the things that I'm most excited about is actually the idea that sometimes pursuing happiness can backfire and actually make you less happy. I mean, there are some researchers that have already been writing about this for a while, and they're talking about things like if you're pursuing happiness too much, sort of too intensely, if you're sort of too preoccupied with happiness, that makes sense that that's not going to be good, right? You want, again, as you say, everything in moderation. If you're sort of trying to be happy at the wrong time, in the wrong place, that like the classic example, sort of happiness at a funeral, or when you did really great at a test and your friend didn't, right? You don't want to show too much happiness. And so there's that side of it. And then what I've been doing with my lab more recently is sort of thinking about the pursuit of happiness and particular strategies that you're using to be happy, and how they can, when they're not used in moderation, how they might backfire, right? So think about like doing acts of kindness for others. Can you be too kind? Can you be not kind enough? Certainly that's the case. Think about gratitude. We do a lot of research on gratitude and how that is a very powerful way to increase happiness. But can you be too grateful, right? Being grateful too often might actually backfire, might make you perceive gratitude as a chore. Being grateful might also make you feel kind of guilty and indebted, right, to someone else, right? And when you truly acknowledge that like other people have supported you very much, and maybe you haven't paid back as much as you should. So there's sort of some I guess I would say unpleasant sides of not really necessarily negative sides, but maybe they don't always feel pleasant of the pursuit of happiness. And so I'm really interested in exploring that when you try to figure out what are sort of the optimal strategies to increase happiness, and under what conditions or situations might they be kind of optimal or ideal, and under what conditions or situations might they kind of backfire or even undermine our happiness.
Talking about the optimal thing, do you avoid the idea of there being sort of we found this is the optimal ingredients, or do you think it's very much, because we used the word subjective at the beginning, like, is it very much, there's 7 billion people in the world, very much everyone has got a perfect recipe which is perfect for them? Or do you think there are some real common things which are just optimal and just for everyone? Like we talked about like connection, gratitude, but like how much do you think is it like very bespoke? Like what's great for Sonja, what's great for Duncan, what's great for, versus there's just some things which are just everyone should take notice of?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I really think it's both, because clearly I'm a believer, in the How of Happiness, I talk about the importance of fit, right? That we all have to find the kind of the most fitting happiness strategy for us. So for some people it might be religion. For other people, religion is the last thing they're going to try. For some people it might be doing a lot of physical exercise, which is definitely associated with happiness. On the other hand, there are some common strategies that are going to probably be helpful for almost everyone, although maybe not everyone. And so as you say, connecting with others, doing acts of kindness for others, nurturing and improving and strengthening our relationships is going to be helpful to pretty much everyone, I think. I mean, it might not be their number one strategy. It could be their number two strategy. So that is really important. And then anything having to do with sort of having a more positive outlook, I think is going to be helpful to almost everyone. But that might come in different forms. For some people, it might be trying to be grateful. For other people, like myself, I find gratitude really hokey. And so I don't know. I mean, not that I'm not I do try to be grateful, but maybe I certainly don't keep a gratitude journal. That does not work for me. And for some people, that works great. But positivity or positive outlook can come from gratitude. It can come from trying to be optimistic about the future, or just looking at the bright side when bad things happen, kind of having a more positive appraisal of when you're coping with adversity. And And so that's kind of, I guess, my top two. Anything having to do with relationships or connections with others, and anything having to do with sort of having a more positive perspective. But how you actually implement those, what strategy you use can differ from person to person.
I just remembered something you said on stage, which made me think about what you're talking about in terms of when things can backfire. Say, for example, you're doing gratitude, and one person lists, I don't know, like 3 or 4 things they're grateful for, and they can tick them straight off. If another person gives themselves a challenge of having to write 20 or 30 things they're grateful for, if they can't fill those numbers, then sorry, explain that. You'll explain that a lot better.
That's exactly right. No, that's a great, Duncan, a very, very good eye there. So we actually are doing a study right now, just starting it, testing that very question, that if you ask people to count sort of too many blessings, that it might backfire. And this comes from research on what's called the effort as information heuristic, effort as information. So what it means is when it takes you effort to come up with an answer, that you actually use that as kind of as a signal that maybe, there's something, maybe I can't come up with the answer. So the classic study actually was done with college students when, after taking a course, they were asked to list, I forget the number, was something like list 3 things you liked about your professor, as opposed to list 12 things you liked about your professor. And guess which group actually ended up liking the professor less overall? The group that was asked to list 12 things, right? Because it's like they couldn't come up with 12 things. So they thought, oh, I must not like this course as much as I thought I did. And so if you are asked to list 12 things to be grateful for, and if you have a hard time coming up with 12 things, you might conclude, oh, gee, I must not have that much to be grateful for in my life. My life sucks. So that's one way that that's when moderation, again, another example where moderation is key, right? You want to sort of count just the right number of blessings.
What does a fulfilled life mean to you?
Well, to me, it's really getting back to what we were talking about before. A lot of it has to do with connection and relationships. So in my life, my family, my friends, of course, mean a huge amount to me, maybe the most important thing in my life. I have 4 kids from ages 4 to 18. And so they're really, really obviously important to me. And then for me, my work means a lot too. So something like we were talking before, goals that you're pursuing, for me, it's my job. And I'm lucky that I have a job that is really meaningful, and there's a lot of variety and novelty to it. So you don't rarely get bored. So those are kind of the two, love and work. Freud said that love and work are kind of the most important things for a mentally healthy person to have. And so I guess we go back to Freud and confirm that.
If over the last sort of 20 or 30 years, one of the big questions was, first of all, like, what is happiness? And then, like, what can we do to kind of make ourselves be happier? If we've tackled those questions in a good way, I mean, there's still obviously a lot of work to be done. But what are the big, in this field, are there any big unknowns, any big grey areas, what are the big question marks still that people are tackling, or there's a lot of energy going towards?
Yeah. Well, I think there's several, but I guess for me, I would say the biggest one is really how do you create a happiness strategy that has a really durable impact that lasts, forever, that lasts for many, many years, right? So how do you make someone happy and maintain and help them maintain it for a lifetime? I mean, that's really, really hard. I mean, that's the kind of the $1 billion question when it comes to health and fitness and relationships too, right? How do you get people to have a good relationship forever, right? And never get divorced? How do you increase happiness and stick with that? Because people will get happier, but then they sort of get less happy again, right? And then they have to sort of start again. Maybe not from the beginning. As I said, I think learning those habits is important, but it's hard to maintain good habits, right? So that's really the hard part is how to maintain happiness.
Absolutely, because I mean, one of the things from the How of Happiness, it's that is now being reused and kind of like many times and kind of referred to as this that sort of that pie chart where 50% is your genes, your DNA, and then 10%, only 10%, we think it'd be much more, is sort of your relationship status, your job, all these kind of things which we think we give much more energy to, thinking that's going to make us really happy. But actually, it's only a meager, 10%, give or take. Could be 15, could be 8, and then 40% is what we can actually act upon. What we can do, those things, acts of kindness, gratitude. So my point is, if there's such a big chunk which we can actually act upon and we can really change ourselves, this is very, I guess, utopian. But like, if I could learn how to be happy, you can learn. 10 people could learn. 100 people, 1,000 people. What do you think is the main roadblocks stopping like really widespread, like millions and millions of people, billions of people, just living in this, living in happiness? What's stopping us?
That's a good question. Well, first of all, I want to say a few things about the pie chart because it's often misinterpreted. I think you described it really well. But it's often misinterpreted because it's really not about individuals, right? So it's not like 40% of my happiness is kind of under my control, but it's really about a population. And those three factors interact and affect one another, right? So your genetics, your genes affect your life circumstances affect your genes and sort of turn them on and off. And then finally, it really is meant to apply to kind of like the average sort of comfortable person in the West, So if you're living in a war zone, or you're in an abusive relationship, or your health is really bad, then those life circumstance part of that pie chart, it's going to be a lot more than 10%, right? It's going to be 90%. And so when you think about like the billions of people in the world, probably for most of them, the biggest obstacle to happiness is their life situation, right? So for many, many people in the world who are living on very, very, small amount of income, per day, and don't have the kind of safety and security that we're used to. So that's going to be the biggest, obstacle to them. Now, if your basic needs are being met, and we're talking about a lot of people in the developed world, then it's not going to be that. It's going to be for a lot of them, it's going to be the genetics, right? So if you have a predisposition for depression or anxiety or eating disorders or addiction, that's going to be a pretty big hurdle. Doesn't mean that you can't be happy, but it's going to be a hurdle. And then for the rest of us, it's sort of as we talked about, it's sort of maintaining those habits, right? Just because you can change happiness doesn't mean that you're going to, or that you're going to be willing to put the effort into it. It's kind of like with health and fitness, right? We all know what we need to do to be healthy and fit, but many people don't do it. And so we know what we need to do to become happier, to have more meaning in life, to flourish more, but it doesn't mean that we're going to sort of have the will to do it. And doesn't mean that we're going to have the energy, the motivation to sort of maintain those habits. So I think for a lot of people that we're sort of talking about, it's going to be that's going to be, I guess, the motivation that's going to be the biggest obstacle.
And this is the question I always ask at the end, and I'm not asking for the magic pill as we've discussed, but what is one thing our listeners can start doing today that will have a positive impact? If they had one sort of actionable thing to go away and do, what would you suggest?
Yeah, I guess if I had to start with one thing, it would be with connection, right? So doing something to connect more with others. I think the easiest and the most straightforward is to do something today to help someone else, to do some kind of act of kindness that you don't normally do, right? It's something that if you're always being generous at the office, whatever, do something different, because that's going to, even if it doesn't make you happy, it's going to make someone else happier or improve their days. So that would be the first thing I would start with, would be to do like 1 or 2 or 3 acts of kindness today.
Amazing. Last but not least, how can people find out more about you and your work? Where can we send them?
I think the easiest would be I have various websites. The easiest one to find is Dr. Sonja. Oh my gosh, now I'm forgetting. It was drsonja.com or sonjalyubomirsky.com.
I can look it up.
Or the How of Happiness.
drsonja.net. So Dr. SONJA.net.
Thank you. You got it. You knew it.
Sonja, thank you so much for this. I really appreciate it. It's been so much fun.
Yeah. Thank you. Great to talk to you. Thank you for your really excellent questions.